There's something unsettling about the final words a person leaves behind. Not the ones spoken in a hospital room. Not the ones whispered to family. But the ones left in plain sight. A message. A moment that seemed ordinary, until it wasn't. Because in the days following Darrell Sheets' reported death in April 22, 2026, people didn't just mourn. They went back. Back through his interviews. Back through his social media. Back through the fragments of a man who built his life on risk, and suddenly seemed to be trying to say something no one fully understood at the time. Something quiet. Something buried. Something that now feels impossible to ignore. But to understand that final message, whatever it truly meant, you have to understand the man behind it. And Darrell Sheets was never a simple man. He wasn't polished. He wasn't predictable. And he definitely wasn't safe. Darrell Sheets came into public consciousness not as a celebrity, but as a force. When storage wars exploded onto television screens in 2010, it introduced audiences to a strange, fascinating world. Abandoned storage units, blind auctions, and the possibility that behind a locked door could be something worthless or life-changing. And in that world, Darrell earned a name that stuck. The Gambler. Not because it sounded good on TV, but because it was exactly who he was. He didn't play it cautious. He didn't wait for safe bets. He went big, sometimes recklessly, and sometimes brilliantly. There's a famous moment that defined his entire persona. A locker purchase, around $3,600, ended up containing artwork that was later valued at hundreds of thousands of dollars. To the audience, it looked like luck. But to Darrell, it was validation. Because gambling wasn't just something he did. It was how he saw the world. On screen he was loud, confident, at times, almost aggressive, but never fake. That was part of his appeal. In a show filled with personalities, Darrell didn't feel like a character. He felt real, unfiltered, unapologetic, and that authenticity made him unforgettable. He wasn't trying to be liked. He was trying to win. Off-screen, the story was more complicated. Darrell Sheets wasn't a man who came from comfort. Before television fame, he spent years grinding through the storage auction business, long before cameras ever showed up. It wasn't glamorous. It was dusty units, long drives, unpredictable income, and risk. Always risk. Because for every big score, there were losses. Bad units. Empty promises behind metal doors. Moments where the gamble didn't pay off. And that kind of lifestyle, it shapes you. It teaches you to trust instinct over logic. To chase the possibility instead of fearing the loss. But it also comes with a cost. Because living on the edge of uncertainty doesn't just stay in business. It seeps into everything. As storage wars grew, so did Darrell's visibility. Fans loved him, not just for his wins, but for the way he handled them. There was a confidence in him that felt earned. A sense that he'd been through enough to not care what anyone thought. But fame changes the equation. Because suddenly, you're not just gambling with money. You're gambling with image. With perception. With the version of yourself the world believes is real. And maintaining that version can become its own kind of pressure. In later interviews, Darrell spoke about stepping back, about slowing down, about focusing on his health. Because behind the larger-than-life persona, there were warning signs. In 2019, he suffered a serious heart attack. It wasn't minor. It wasn't something easily brushed off. Reports at the time suggested it was severe, life-threatening. For many people, that kind of moment changes everything. It forces reflection, re-evaluation, and for a while, it seemed like it did. Darrell talked about taking things easier, about not pushing himself the same way. But people close to him noticed something else. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly. A shift. The energy that once defined him started to change. Not gone, but different. Less explosive. More controlled. Some described it as maturity. Others weren't so sure. Because alongside that change came something harder to define. A distance. Not physical, necessarily, but emotional. The kind that doesn't show up in headlines. the kind that only people paying close attention would notice. Social media became one of the only windows into his life. And at first, everything looked normal. Photos, updates, moments that felt consistent with a man people thought they knew. But then, there were posts that didn't quite fit. Nothing extreme. Nothing alarming on the surface. But subtle. Tone shifts. Language that felt heavier. More reflective. More personal than usual. As if he wasn't just talking to fans anymore. As if he was trying to say something deeper. Something that didn't quite belong in the world of reality TV and storage auctions. And then there were the silences. Gaps between posts. Longer than usual. Unexplained. In an age where constant visibility is expected, silence can be louder than anything. Especially when it comes from someone who built a career on presence. People began to ask questions. Quietly at first. Friends, fans, followers who had been watching for years. Was he okay? Was he just stepping back? Or was something else going on? There were no clear answers. Only fragments. Moments that, at the time, didn't seem connected. But looking back now, feel different. Because hindsight has a way of turning ordinary things into signals. And when tragedy enters the picture, real or rumored, it changes how we see everything that came before it. Every word, every pause, every message. One post in particular would later stand out. Not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. It was simple. Almost too simple. The kind of message that would normally pass unnoticed. But after everything that followed, it didn't feel simple anymore. It felt intentional, deliberate, like a piece of something bigger. The problem is, at the time, no one was looking for meaning. No one was trying to decode it. Because why would they? Darrell Sheets was still Darrell Sheets. The gambler. The man who always came out swinging. The man who had survived worse. The man who didn't look like someone who was quietly unraveling. But sometimes, the strongest personas are the ones that hide the most. And sometimes, the final message isn't the one people expect. It's not dramatic. It's not obvious. It's quiet. Almost invisible. Until it isn't. By early 2026, something had undeniably shifted. The man who once thrived on chaos and risk seemed distant from it. Less visible. Less engaged. And for those paying attention, the question wasn't just what changed. It was why. Because behind every public figure is a private reality. And whatever Darrell was going through in those final months, it wasn't fully visible. Not to fans. Not to the media. Maybe not even to the people closest to him. And then came the moment that changed everything. Not loud. Not public. But final. And suddenly, that simple message didn't feel simple anymore. It felt like a warning. Or maybe a goodbye. By the time 2026 began, something about Darrell Sheets no longer felt aligned with the man people thought they knew. Not in a way that made headlines. Not in a way that triggered immediate concern. But in the quieter details. The kind you only notice if you've been watching for a long time. Because Darrell had always been predictable in one sense. He was loud when he needed to be. Confident when it counted. And even when he stepped back from the spotlight, there was still a presence to him. A consistency. But in those final months, that consistency started to fracture. His appearances became sporadic. Not just on television, but online. And for someone whose identity had been tied so closely to visibility, that absence didn't go unnoticed. At first, people assumed it was intentional. Retirement. A quieter life. A man choosing peace after years of chaos. But then came the posts. They weren't frequent, and they weren't dramatic, but they carried a tone that felt different, more reflective, more inward. There was less bravado, less of the gambler, and more of something else, something harder to define. In one post, he spoke about time, not in a philosophical, abstract way, but in a way that felt personal, finite, as if he was measuring it differently than before. In another, he mentioned gratitude, but not casually, not the kind of surface-level appreciation public figures often express. This felt heavier. like someone acknowledging something they might not have much of left. Still nothing that screamed crisis. Nothing that confirmed anything was wrong, which is what made it so easy to overlook. But behind the scenes, according to scattered reports and conversations that would only surface later, Darrell's world may not have been as stable as it appeared. There were suggestions, unconfirmed, but persistent, that he had become increasingly isolated, spending more time alone, pulling back from people he once interacted with regularly. Now, isolation in itself isn't unusual, especially for someone who has lived a public life. But in combination with everything else, it started to form a pattern. There were also whispers about online interactions, comments, messages, the kind of digital noise that comes with fame. Some supportive, some not. And in recent years, the line between public attention and targeted negativity has become dangerously thin. Cyberbullying isn't always loud. It's not always a viral moment or a trending topic. Sometimes, it's quieter, persistent, a steady stream of criticism, judgment, and hostility that builds over time. And while there's no confirmed record detailing the full extent of what Darrell may have experienced, several fans later pointed to exchanges that suggested he wasn't entirely immune to it. Replies that felt defensive. Moments where his tone shifted, as if something was getting under his skin. Again, nothing definitive. Nothing you could point to and say, this is the reason. But enough to raise questions, especially in hindsight. Because when people look back after a loss, they don't just search for answers. They search for signs. And in Darrell's case, there were more than a few. One of the most discussed elements after his reported death wasn't a single dramatic statement. It was a collection of smaller ones. Fragments. Posts that, individually, didn't seem significant, but together, painted a different picture. There was a noticeable shift in how he talked about his past. Less about victories, more about reflection. Less about what he gained, more about what it cost. In one interaction, he reportedly responded to a fan with unusual directness. Instead of the usual confidence, there was something almost weary, as if the persona he had carried for years was starting to feel heavy. And then, there was the message. It didn't go viral immediately. It didn't spark concern in real time. Because on the surface, it looked like just another post. Short, simple, easy to scroll past. But after everything that followed, it became the center of attention. The exact wording has been debated. Screenshots shared, reposted, analyzed. Some claim it was a farewell. Others believe it was simply a reflection taken out of context. And that's the problem with final messages. They don't come with explanations. What's clear is this. The message carried a tone that didn't match the public version of Darrell Sheets. It wasn't bold. It wasn't confident. It was quiet, almost subdued. Some interpreted it as gratitude. Others saw it as resignation. A few even described it as a subtle goodbye. But at the time, no one treated it that way. Because why would they? There was no official statement. No visible crisis. Just a man posting something that felt slightly different. And that's what makes it unsettling. Because if it was a message, if it was intentional, then it was hidden in plain sight. In the weeks leading up to his death, the pattern continued. Less activity, more silence, and when he did appear, something felt off. Not dramatically, but enough that people who knew his usual energy started to notice. There were also reports, again, unconfirmed but repeated, about unusual decisions. Business-related choices that didn't quite align with his past behavior. Pulling back from certain opportunities. Stepping away from deals. Almost as if he was disengaging. It's easy to interpret those actions in multiple ways. Maybe it was health-related. Maybe it was personal. Or maybe it was something deeper. Because when someone begins to withdraw, not just socially, but professionally, it can signal a shift in priorities. Or a loss of interest. Or something more complex. And then, everything stopped. The exact details surrounding his reported death have not been publicly confirmed in full. Out of respect, they remain private. And they should. Because the focus isn't on how it happened. It's on what came before. What matters is the timeline, the sequence of moments that led to that point, and the message that now sits at the center of it all. Because once the news broke, everything changed. The posts that once felt ordinary were suddenly scrutinized. Every word reread, every pause reconsidered, and that simple message, the one no one paid attention to at the time, became something else entirely. A clue, a signal, or maybe a final attempt to be understood. The question that remains isn't just what did he mean, it's was he trying to say something that no one was ready to hear? Because sometimes, people don't ask for help directly. They don't make it obvious. They leave pieces, fragments, hoping someone will connect them. And sometimes, no one does. By the time the world realized something was wrong, it was already too late. And that's what makes the final message so haunting. Not just what it said, but when it was said, and how quietly it passed through the world, unnoticed, until it became the only thing anyone could talk about. The news didn't break all at once. It spread, quietly at first, then all at once. A name, a headline, a sentence that didn't feel real. Darrell Sheets, gone. For fans of Storage Wars, it felt surreal. Because Daryl wasn't just a cast member. He was part of the identity of the show. Constant. Someone who had always been there. Loud, confident, unshaken. And now, suddenly, he wasn't. The reactions came in waves. First confusion, then disbelief, then something heavier. A realization that whatever had been happening behind the scenes, it had reached an end. Co-stars responded. Some publicly, some privately. Their messages carried a tone that went beyond standard condolences. There was respect, but also something else. A kind of quiet acknowledgement that Daryl's life hadn't been as simple as it looked on screen. People who had worked with him described him as intense, but genuine, difficult at times, but real. Someone who didn't pretend to be anything he wasn't. And in an industry built on performance, that kind of authenticity stands out. His son, Darrell Sheets, became a focal point of public attention. Not by choice, but because when someone passes, people look for those closest to them, hoping for answers, context, closure. Brandon's responses, like many in that position, were measured, respectful, focused on honoring his father rather than explaining him. And maybe that's the most telling part, because some stories can't be fully explained from the outside. As tributes continued, something else began to happen. The narrative shifted from what happened to why. And that's where things become complicated. Because when it comes to loss, especially sudden, unexpected loss, people want clarity, a reason, because they can point to and say, this is what led to it. But real life rarely works that way. Instead, people turn back to the only thing they had. His words, his actions, his final message. The message that had once passed unnoticed, now carried weight. Every word analyzed, every tone interpreted. Some believed it was simply reflective. A man looking back on his life, grateful, at peace. Others saw something else. A subtle sadness, a distance, the kind of emotional undertone that only becomes visible after the fact. And then there were those who believed it was intentional. Not a goodbye in the traditional sense, but a signal, a quiet acknowledgement that something wasn't right. The truth is, could have been any of those things, or none of them, because without direct confirmation, interpretation becomes subjective, shaped by emotion, by perspective, by the need to make sense of something that doesn't easily make sense. But what can be said with certainty is this: Darrell Sheets, like many public figures, lived two lives. The one we saw, and the one we didn't. The version on television was clear, confident, fearless, always willing to take the risk. But off-screen, there were layers, health struggles, moments of isolation, the pressure of maintaining a public image, and potentially, the weight of unseen criticism. Because fame doesn't protect people. If anything, it exposes them to judgment, to expectations, to a level of scrutiny that never fully turns off. And in recent years, that scrutiny has evolved. Social media has made it constant, immediate, personal. Cyberbullying isn't always obvious. It doesn't always trend, but its impact can be real. And for someone already dealing with health issues, personal reflection, and the natural process of aging, even small things can accumulate. Again, there is no confirmed narrative tying any single factor to Darrell's final days. And it's important to keep it that way, because reducing a life to one cause often misses the truth. People are complex, and so are their struggles. What Darrell's story does highlight is something broader, something uncomfortable, the gap between how someone appears and how they actually feel. Because from the outside, everything can look fine. Success, recognition, a legacy built over years. But internally, the experience can be very different. And that's what makes the idea of a final message so powerful. Not because it provides answers, but because it raises questions. Was he trying to say something? Or were people simply searching for meaning after the fact? Did anyone notice the shift in time? Or did it only become visible once it was too late? And perhaps the most difficult question of all, if someone is trying to communicate something quietly, how do we learn to hear it? Because not everyone asks for help directly. Not everyone makes their pain obvious. Some people express it in fragments, in tone changes, in subtle shifts that don't stand out unless you're really looking. Darrell Sheets built his life on risk, on instinct, on reading what others might miss. And in a way, his final chapter reflects something similar. A message that wasn't obvious. A signal that wasn't loud. A moment that didn't stop the world when it happened, but now feels impossible to ignore. In the end, maybe the most honest way to understand his story isn't to claim certainty, but to sit with the uncertainty. To recognize that behind every public figure is a private reality we may never fully understand. And to remember that sometimes, the most important things people say are the ones we almost miss. Darrell Sheets will be remembered for many things. For the risks he took, for the persona he built, for the impact he left on a show that defined a genre. But beyond all of that, there's something quieter that remains. A final message, not fully understood, not fully explained, but felt. And maybe that's what changes everything, because it forces us to look closer, to listen more carefully, to question what we think we know about the people we watch, admire, and assume we understand. And if there's anything to take from it, it's this. Not every struggle is visible. Not every message is loud. And not every goodbye sounds like one.